Hello everyone, this is week number 11 of my week at the club, and I'm going to try something a little different this week. It's third round of the club championship. I played last night, and rather than look at the game and analyze it carefully and go through with the computer, I thought I'd give my first impressions without having looked at the computer and just run through the game fairly quickly. Then I'll take a look at the computer offline and then add on corrections and surely have a little more wisdom after I see what the Silicon Beast has to offer. But last night I played against Ray Paulson on the first board, and this is the third round. We were the two undefeated people, so we got paired together. And I was a bit late. I had a golf match, unfortunately, so I was about 10 minutes late to my game. So I started out with a slight time deficit, and eventually that sort of played into the game. So here's how it unfolded. And once again, I'm trying to find the perfect interface, so it's yet a different look and feel here. But the very first move for Ray was what he's played in the past, d4. I responded with my knight, flexible reply. Last time we played, we got into an Evans Gambit, or Heaven's Gambit, yeah, I wish. We got into a, what did we get into? It's a Benko Gambit, sorry. And after he played c4, a Benko Gambit, of course, goes c4 and c5. And, play goes in quite a different direction after that. He didn't do that this week. He avoided that by instead continuing with the knight to f3 rather than bringing out the c-pawn. So I continued with g6. He went in for a London system with the bishop posted on f4, which has been quite popular now at the highest levels of chess. I continued with my fianchetto setup. He went on with the typical pawn structure for the London. It was a pawn on e3 and then eventually to play a c4. I counterattacked with c5, and sorry for all those green circles, but my thinking in this position when I played c5 was that I wanted to disrupt his center before he had a chance to get it too strengthened, and I also wanted to try to increase the scope of my bishop here on g7 to bear down on his queen side. So it seemed to make sense to attack this pawn that's on d4. So I did so with c5. And after c5, if he captures my pawn, then I can simply come out with the queen check. He has to do something. Knight out is actually probably not too good because that would allow, that knight is pinned, and that would allow me to put a triple attack on this weak point that's on c3. And so c3 here. So instead of playing out with the knight at that point, what he would probably do is to instead block with the queen. And then, queen trade could happen, or at some point, if I don't trade queens, he could play his knight to c3 sometime in the near future. Okay, so he didn't take the pawn. Instead, he, after I attacked it, he defended it with his c-pawn. And now he's got quite a solid structure there with that triangle set up in the center. So I went ahead and tried to loosen it up by a pawn exchange, and he surprised me by taking back with the e-pawn. I thought he'd take with the c-pawn, maintaining a symmetric structure. This has some advantages and some weaknesses. So it gives a bit more of an unbalanced feel to the position. So he has a half-open E file. I have a half-open C file here. And one possibility in such a position would be to do the minority attack with these pawns over here on the queen side, and try to prove that this pawn structure is weak. So that was certainly in my thinking at this point. I also wanted to do something about this bishop that's lurking on f4 and try to reduce its scope somewhat. But first I took time out to castle. He developed his bishop to a sensible square. So with pawn to d6, what I'm hoping to do here is to have a bit more control over this e5 square that we're both contesting. And he continued at this point by just going ahead and castling. And I did sort of an odd-looking move, playing the knight out to the rim where its prospects are dim, as the saying goes. Attacking his loose bishop that's on f4, so he has to do something about it, and encouraging him to trade it off. Now, I thought at this point that it was likely that he would play his bishop to g5 in return, at which point I was going to park my queen on c7, which would keep defending the e-pawn and also get out of the pin. So that was the plan, but he didn't choose to do that. Instead, he took this bishop and backed up with it to e3. That allowed me to continue with my idea of counterattacking this in the center and also trying to loosen up the central pawn formation for my long bishop diagonal. So I played e5. And at this point, I think he doesn't have a lot of choices. He decided to trade off the pawns. I mean, he could keep the tension here. I'm threatening at some point to push the pawn further to e4, and he was not keen on that, I suspect. The other thing is that by trading the pawns, he's opening up the diagonal for his dark squared bishop. So after takes, he could, although he chose not to, at this point, play the bishop to c5. And of course that attacks my rook down here on f8, and I'd have to move it to e8. As I say, though, he didn't do that. Instead, he played his knight to b to d2. I thought his b knight to d2. I thought, of course, at that point that he might actually choose to trade the queens off, although that doesn't really help him. That just moves my rook over to the open d file. So he blocked off the d file. And at this point, I was sorely tempted to play f5. And I'll get it yet. So play this pawn up to f5, with the idea of starting a rapid pawn expansion over here. And the reason for that is because at some point his knight will actually move off of f3, and then my knight will be attacked, and I'll have to retreat it. And so if I'd rather prepare for that by moving this f-pawn first, and if I get it up out of the way, then my knight can come back to f6 when it gets attacked by his knight moving. So that was sort of the sequence of moves that I was looking at. But I was reluctant to do that immediately, because if I play f5, then I'm really weakening my king's position. So, for example, he could come out with a queen check. Oh, it's a loud check. And if I play king to h8, well, I don't really want to pin my rook. Assuming I play king to h8, then he has the knight up here to g5, and he's threatening two things at once here. One is the fork, which is, you know, the paramount thing that I'd have to do something about. The other thing is he's also threatening bishop takes knight, ruining my pawn structure. And I'd have to take back here with my g-pawn and have these horrible doubled H pawns in a very weak king position, and that didn't appeal to me at all. So that's why I didn't go in for this line immediately. It just looked like it was too dangerous for my king. So instead what I did was to develop my knight to c6. Basically the problem is I'm a little bit behind in development. He has all four minor pieces developed now. We both castled, and after playing my knight out, I've got three minor pieces developed, so I'm only one extra piece behind, but I've lost ground even since the beginning of the game. So in these situations, you have to be really careful about a counterattack based upon the mobility and access of the other players' pieces coming into that attack. So after I played knight c6, he surprised me a little bit. He brought his queen out to a4. I suppose it shouldn't have been a surprise, but after he did it, it looked fairly sensible. It allows his rook here that's on a1 to threaten to come over to d1 and put his rooks on the central files. Also, with the queen over here on a4, it could be transferring to the king side rather easily and exert control on some of these squares that are likely to be contested in the next few moves, and also at some point possibly come all the way over. Sorry, I keep hitting right-clicking with my mouse to try to draw arrows, and that's why that menu is popping up. So that's the kind of thing that this threatens, and what I played was a pretty simple reply to that, which is to go ahead and develop my bishop to a kind of an awkward square, but it's even more awkward for the white queen because there are various threats now. If he did something that wasn't particularly clever, I suppose, like just develop the rook here, then what I'm threatening is to have a discovered attack on the queen with knight to d4. And now, you know, where's the queen going to go? There aren't that many squares. And the problem is, of course, is that this bishop on e2 is going to be lost. So, you know, he'd have to play, excuse me, something like queen to a3, and now knight takes bishop, check. So that would be a disaster for white. Of course, Ray wouldn't do that. But that's the kind of thing that bishop d7 is threatening, and he has to do something to meet that threat. What he did was to retreat the queen. It's basically what I expected. That gave me a move to play my knight in now to f4. So an interesting aspect of this position is that this pawn, or this knight rather, that's on c6, is now making it possible for me to not worry about this b pawn. So if he, for example, exchanges off the knight and I take it back, don't know why it's doing that, take it back like that, and then he were to take this pawn, that's basically a poison pawn because it's simple reply knight or rook to b8, and now this knight is solid on that square. He would have to retreat his queen to the a file, and then I get to come in down to b2, and the position is looking quite good for black, or at least that's what I believe. So of course we didn't go down that line. in this position, instead of taking the pawn, he played his knight out to c4. Okay, threatening at some point, I suppose, maybe to post a knight on e5 if he can get it protected one more time, say by a rook or something. And also just possibly threatening to come into this d6 square once the rook comes on this d file. In fact, at this point, I got pretty worried about the rook getting active along the d file and pinning my bishop. And I made a move that I think I think was probably a mistake. I'll have to see if the engine agrees that it was a mistake. After I made it, I didn't like it, but I really didn't see any nice way to counter his pressure along the d file. So if I did something like b6 to threaten the pawn, save the pawn. Excuse me. I think I'll get a drink of water. Hold on. Okay, that's better. I should point out that the queen actually is now in that position, is threatening to take the pawn, because after rook over, this knight on b2 is now defended by his knight. The pawn on b2 is defended by his knight. So I had to do something about the threat on the pawn, or at least that's what I felt at the time. And playing pawn to b6 didn't look too nice in view of this variation of the rook coming over, attacking this pinned bishop. If I play queen to c7, well, I've got the disadvantage that I had in the game continuation, namely that I've abandoned this diagonal that I want to be on over here, supporting my kingside attack. And so I haven't really gained anything if I instead, at this point, after rook a d1, played queen to e7 to defend my bishop. Now he can simply, I was attacking his bishop, of course, but he can not only defend the bishop, but threaten to have a discovered attack on my queen now, retreating with his bishop and driving my queen away from the defense of my bishop on d7. So this is getting into a lot of activity for his pieces and a very defensive posture for me that is probably going to turn out badly. So instead of all that, I played queen to c7. Now, the problem, as I alluded to, is that what I really want to do here, or what I'm thinking about, is attacking on the king side. I wanted to make use of this pawn that's on f4 to help support a kingside attack. Keep in mind that if you took all the pieces off the board, the king and pawn endgame now would be lost for black. At least I think it is, because the 3 pawns of whites over here could very likely hold the 4 pawns, given the fact that they're doubled. And whereas on the remote queen side here, he has a very healthy 3-2 majority, and he can just push this c pawn. So I felt like my chances for winning the game really lie in the middle game. And in particular, it seemed like the most sensible plan was to attack on the king side. And in order to do that, I wanted to push this pawn on g6 up to g5 and then g4, drive the knight away, and use the pawns to batter open his king's position. That was my plan. And in order to do that, I needed my queen here on d8 to support the pawn push to g5. Otherwise, his knight just takes my pawn. It's not defended there. So that was all my thinking. And so it was a real concession to have to go ahead and just play in this position, play my queen to c7. But I did that because I felt that I really needed to defend this pawn sitting here on b7. And furthermore, my queen does have one useful thing that it does, is it supports this pawn on f4 and could actually get into the attack on the king side that way. but I was worried about my queen getting isolated over here on the queen side if I didn't have an avenue open up for my queen to get transferred back over to the king side, and that's a bit of what happened. So after I played my queen to c7, Ray went ahead and posted his rook on the e-file, which looked like a sensible move. I actually expected him to use the other rook to the d-file first. I played pawn up, and the idea here is twofold. One is to, as I was saying, is to support this g-pawn's move up to g5 and then eventually g4, driving away his knight. The other purpose is to keep the knight out of that square, because I saw that it might become advantageous for my bishop to play on e6 and pin his knight. So in particular, the situation that happened was that he played his rook over, attacking along the d-file, and now after this, the threat is that the knight or the rook, but I figured probably the knight, would come in here to d6 on the next move. The rook to d6 looks pretty good too. He could double his rooks. And my plan had been, and it worked out okay, was to go ahead now and play my bishop to e6. That pins his knight, and so if the rook went there, I could trade off the knight, for example, and then win the rook. Or if the knight goes there, well, I can't. It's pinned to the queen, and I just take his queen. So that prevents, at least for a while, his knight from coming into this weak square on d6. And furthermore, now that I have my pawn here on h6, the other knight isn't going to be able to come into g5 and threaten to trade off my bishop. So I was fairly happy with this situation. After that, he played queen to a4, breaking the pin, but now that starts to put new ideas in mind, because of course the two pieces like this, a square apart, could be quite easily forked by a pawn if I get it supported on g5. So after two pawn moves, and I win a piece with that fork. Of course, that takes time, and it's time that I don't have. So at this point, I went ahead and developed my rook to the d-file. I was worried that his two rooks in the central files uncontested would cause a problem for me, and I decided that I really needed to neutralize the pressure of that rook. And he surprised me a little by retreating his knight back to a3. And part of the thing that surprised me about that is, well, first off, it leaves a undefended pawn in its wake. I can't really afford to take that right now with the bishop, because if I did, the bishop on a2 could become trapped very easily. He could just advance his pawn to b3, and then my bishop is trapped behind the pawn wall. I wasn't sure if, it looked like it was trapped. I wasn't certain that there wasn't, there might be some way for me to, with some pawn moves, to develop a way out. But since I have another good move available to me, I went ahead and just made the other good move, which is a6. Basically, he's threatening, actually, yeah. He was, that's true. Let me go back and move here. If the bishop should actually take the pawn, it's even worse than just being trapped back there, because he has the move knight to b5. And I didn't see this until after I looked for a little while at the position. My queen has to move, and after my queen moves, the bishop would be lost, although it's not clear if I play my queen out to a5 here, that might keep my bishop from being trapped, because then he would have to do something like trading the queens, recapture, and now I guess my bishop has time to get back out. So that's an interesting tactical sequence I'll have to look some more at. I didn't analyze that properly in its entirety in the game. So instead, after he played the knight back, I just went ahead and played a6. And that keeps the pawn from coming out and is actually very positional in nature because it restricts the the knight's mobility, and now the knight has to find a different way to re-enter the game, which appealed to me. Also, it threatens now advancing the pawn to b5. So Ray immediately redeployed the knight onto c2. After that, that gave me I have a breathing space here. I have a tempo that I can use on my kingside attack, so I got that moving once again and pushed the g-pawn. Unfortunately, he can reply with h3, and now if I push the pawn again, he simply takes it, right? Yep, let's go ahead and actually make, new variation. Take that and back. Takes back like that. And in my mind, this didn't look like that scary of a position for white because of I lost my mobility of the pawns up there, and it's going to be difficult to tear open any holes. This h-pawn is still mobile, so I certainly have the possibility of advancing it up, but that's about all. And this didn't look as promising as I would hope that it would be. So instead, after h3, I dropped the bishop back to bring back this tactical threat and sort of introduce the idea of his queen being in an awkwardly placed. That is, it's out in the open, and I have some minor pieces, both bishops and the knight. I have my rooks that can come into play, and it seemed like there was a fair chance that I could embarrass the queen. And he went to c4, and on this square, I could hit it with my pawn, like so. That was one possibility, but he looked like there's this dark square here. In fact, these dark squares in around my queen side are a little less well attacked than the light squares are, because my bishop is momentarily stuck over on the king side. Although I did have ideas of maybe moving this rook that's on f8, moving it over, and then bringing the bishop back out to f8 to attack a queen and exert control on the squares. But I felt that there wasn't enough control over there. So anyhow, what happened was that after he played queen to f4, I attacked it. I went back to where I was. He repeated, went back to a4, and we repeated twice, and he offered, well, we were one move from a draw, and we decided on a draw after his next move. I could claim a draw, and then he could claim one after that if he wanted, from repetition, threefold repetition of the position. And part of my thinking was I was down to under 30 minutes now. I was 28 or something like that. He had nearly 50 minutes left on his clock, so I had a disadvantage in time. I think the position's a bit better for black here, but I was worried about things getting traded off, like the rooks on the open file, and then drifting into a lost endgame with my pawn structure. Of course, there's before the end game, the gods place the middle game. Tara Asher, somebody said that, and I presumably could make use of the middle game to try to more robustly attack his queen or attack on the king side. One idea, of course, is to defend my g-pawn somehow, maybe by my bishop going to f6, and then push the h-pawn and then the g-pawn. So, I'll have to take a look with the engine. I perhaps should have taken more of a chance, but this keeps me in contention in the championship. We both have 2.5 points, and we're leading the field. He's about 100 points higher rated than I am, so I didn't take a rating hit for drawing, and it seemed like a not too unreasonable result for the game. So Okay, well, I'll check back in with the engine after I have a chance to cheat and see what the rest of the story really is. Bye-bye for now. Okay, well, I'm back, having looked at what the computer thinks of the various positions, and it agreed with a lot of what was played, thought white was doing, had the advantage all up to this point where Ray played his queen out to a4, and that dropped the advantage to 0. It felt that the queen was misplaced there. It liked this plan of bishop there okay. It wasn't too worried about the pawn. It liked the idea of the knight coming in and attacking the bishop on e2. That was its first choice. This was all according to the computer line. And then it did not like the idea of queen c7, as I suspected that maybe it wouldn't. Although, interestingly enough, it wasn't because it was so keen on the idea of attacking on the king side. Instead, it wanted me to be pushing the b pawn. So for several moves, it wanted me to play pawn to b5, driving the knight away. And the idea is that the queen just can't afford to take that pawn. And there are some different variations I looked at, but basically the queen gets stuck out in the middle of the board and hopelessly harassed if it takes that pawn. Going forward, it didn't find too much to disagree with. In this position, I said that, gee, maybe I could take the pawn, and then I thought, well, maybe I couldn't because of queen to h5. It turns out that in this variation, what happens, sort of interesting, if black does take the pawn and white attacks the queen like so, then and black tries to extricate himself by playing the queen to a5. After the trade here, I missed the fact that the rook can come over to the a file, and now it's attacking two undefended pieces along that file, and I'm going to lose a piece. So this is actually very bad for black. I was lucky I didn't go down that line, but it actually liked this positional a6 idea was its first choice. And in the final position, it wanted, after bishop to e6, rather than repeating moves, it wanted me to go ahead and, well, actually, after white retreats the queen to a4, it wanted black to go ahead and play queen to b6, putting pressure on, actually on white's queen side. So a lot of the computer lines here seem to indicate that even though it looks like I'm attacking on the king side, what I really should be doing is pressing the minority attack on the queen side and working on this weak pawn formation with my queen. And it's not that I'm going to immediately win that pawn. He can drop back and defend it, but then it's wanted me to trade rooks along the d file and do something like this. Just basically make a lot of moves that I wasn't willing to make because I thought that that I was getting entirely too close to having an endgame here where my pawn formation would be at too much of a disadvantage. But I guess in this open position with the two bishops, it still likes black's position, although only by about a half a pawn or so. It rates it at minus 0.5. So I shouldn't feel too bad about taking the draw, I guess. I might have been a bit more combative than I was, and maybe next time I won't wuss out of it, but that's what I did. And so next week I'll be playing on board 2, I believe, against Paul Godin, who has 2 points. So Ray and I have 2.5. And Paul and George Marjanian both have 2, or George has 1.5, I guess. And Ray will be playing him. So that's all for now. I'll see you next week, and hopefully this experiment in a new format and with a new chest tool wasn't too painful for you. Bye-bye.